No, voy a grabar ahora. Ok. Primer video es de como unos 10 minutos y luego uno de 5 minutos después. Entonces, a ver, dígame si escuchan.
My name is
¿Pueden
Paul and
escuchar?
I'm from Canada.
No. It's a dumb joke. All right.
On Earth speak. Oh shit.
Oh, sorry. I was trying to get past that.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Lang Focus channel and my name is Paul. Today we'll be going way back to see how we're all connected. Well, not all of us, but about half of us. Around 46% of the people on Earth speak an Indo-European language as their native language throughout Europe, South Asia, the Americas, and beyond. The Indo-European language family contains languages as diverse as English, Hindi, Persian, Russian, Armenian, and Greek, languages which on the surface may seem to have nothing in common, but they actually do. All Indo-European languages developed from Proto-Indo-European. According to the most widely accepted theory, Proto-Indo-European was spoken around 6,500 years ago on the Eurasian steppe of eastern Ukraine, southern Russia, and the Caucasus. The Indo-Europeans were the first, or among the first people to domesticate horses, which greatly increased their ability to travel and migrate. Over the following 3 millennia, Indo-European people migrated far and wide, conquering new lands on horseback and bringing their language with them, as it developed into different varieties, which eventually grew into different branches of the Indo-European language family. The Indo-Europeans first migrated into Europe, Anatolia, and Central Asia, then later into northern India and Iran, as migration continued deeper into Europe and Central Asia. There's an alternate theory, based more on archaeological evidence, that suggests that the Indo-European languages began in Anatolia several thousand years earlier and spread with the expansion of agriculture. There are no written records of Proto-Indo-European and its early offshoots, so the best we can do is to theorize and imagine. However they happened to take place, during these migrations, Proto-Indo-European split into numerous different languages, which would gradually develop into entire branches of the Indo-European language family. Those branches are Anatolian, which is now extinct, Tocharian, which is also extinct, Italic and Celtic, which may share a common Italo-Celtic ancestor, Armenian and Albanian, which each consist of just one language, as far as we know, Hellenic, Germanic, Balto-Slavic, which split into the Baltic and Slavic branches, and Indo-Iranian, which split into the Iranic and Indic branches. All of these branches and their individual languages have been developing in different regions with different influences for thousands of years, so they are now very different from each other. But through comparative study, we can see that Indo-European languages share a common word stock, as well as some phonetic and, historically speaking, some grammatical tendencies. There are a significant number of cognate words in Indo-European languages. By the way, the word cognate comes from Latin cognatus, which means born together. These words were indeed born together in Proto-Indo-European, and if we're aware of the sound changes that have taken place, we can identify cognates. For instance, the word meaning bear or carry. In Sanskrit, it's bahad. In Greek, it's per. In modern Greek, this might be pronounced like an F sound, but in ancient Greek, it was actually an aspirated P sound. In Latin, it's fer. In Gothic, it's baer. In Old English, it's bear. They all come from Proto-Indo-European baer. And my pronunciation of these different languages is probably not perfect, but I'm just giving it a shot myself. I should point out that the Proto-Indo-European words are theoretical reconstructions, and that there's no way of knowing for sure what they sounded like. But these...
Oh, rapidito. Uno quizás pensaría, ¿cómo es posible que una P se haga una F, algo así, se vuelva una F? Un ejemplo un ejemplo un poco más contemporáneo. En español hablamos en el capítulo 2 que tenemos el fonema bilabial oclusivo, y luego que tiene dos alófonos, el aproximante, y no tengo el símbolo aquí, but you have your bilabial approximant and you have your occlusive. Entonces, entre vocales, por ejemplo, y también si no viene después de una pausa, una nasal, siempre va a ser el alófono aproximante. Like I said, I'll just put approximate, porque no tengo el símbolo. Pero también hay otros alófonos. Y en el español chileno, por ejemplo, el español chileno tenemos esto. Tenemos esto como un alófono de la oclusiva bilabial, el fonema oclusivo bilabial. Por ejemplo, entonces yo tengo un amigo que en vez de decir el bus, dice el bus, el bus. Mi hija, que habla el español chileno y también obviamente inglés, pero cuando habla el español chileno, ella usa este alófono mucho en lugar de este y este. Entonces es un cambio o una preferencia, y si una preferencia o un alófono se hace más prevaleciente o más común que otro, vamos viendo los inicios, digamos, de un cambio fonético. Mi hija, por ejemplo, dice el balón, por ejemplo, en vez de el balón, así dice mi hija. Y también existe este alófono para la B en el español chileno. Entonces la palabra resbalar a veces se escucha pronunciarse como resfalar, o a lot of times they'll cut that S out, refalar, refalar. Entonces es un cambio fonético. Entonces es muy posible que un fonema bilabial se vuelva un alófono o un fonema nuevo labiodental. Entonces, un cambio fonético empieza como, obviamente, un alófono. Si se hace más preferido o más común que otros alófonos, es muy posible que con el paso de los años, con el paso de las décadas, se haga un fonema nuevo. So you can have an allophone that with sound changes eventually becomes a phoneme. And it's like, well, how do you get from bilabial? That's not a huge step from bilabial to labiodental, but it's just showing you how a sound change can occur. So let's say in Chile, this pronunciation between or after an S or something like that becomes so prevalent that eventually all of these are no longer allophones after an S, and this becomes the only allophone of this after an S. And then eventually it becomes so common that maybe the meaning is that it becomes so common they perceive these as different, then this could eventually, it's already a phoneme in Spanish, but it could be the phoneme then that ends up being there, refalar. Entonces, eso es algo que pasa con el paso de los años, pero es para mostrarles cómo se hacen los cambios fonéticos. No es algo de la noche a la mañana, es algo que ocurre con el paso de muchos años y empieza como variación alofónica y luego una preferencia quizá alofónica en cierto grupo y luego se hace fonema. Entonces, ¿alguna pregunta? ¿Ninguna pregunta? Muy bien. So we have that kind of thing. So like in the South, you have the pen-pin merger. So you have E and I in English, the pen-pin merger in English. And those, con el paso de los años, en cierta parte de Estados Unidos, se han hecho un solo fonema vocálico, o se han fusionado. So you get something that is, in some places of the South, you don't have pen and pin are the same thing, pin. It's kind of like a merger between the two. So it's more like a pin, and get out your pin or type your pin in or something like that. And so that's an example of a sound change, a more contemporary sound change that has happened. Same thing has happened, for example, if you go to Pittsburgh and you're a true Steelers fan, you actually don't say Steelers, you say Stillers. And so the E and the I, in that case, there's a merger going on right there. También tenemos, no sé si hay alguna persona aquí que pronuncian esta palabra de forma distinta. Is there anyone who pronounces those words differently here? Nadie. I'm looking for hands. No, nadie. Well, si van al Midwest y al este, if you go to the Midwest or the East, this right here is caught, this sound, and then this right here is caught. So caught, like caught. I can't do it because it's not in my dialect. Caught, and caught. And so there's a distinction there, but you go to the West Coast and they're pronounced the same. Apparently here in Texas as well. So that's another example of a modern day sound change that happens. You have two different vowels that eventually merge into one. Entonces eso es lo que está explicando con la separación de las ramas del proto-indoeuropeo. Podemos no adivinar, pero hipotetizar de manera muy educada cómo sonaban palabras antiguamente mediante los cambios fonéticos históricos que han ocurrido para llegar, digamos, a un candidato léxico común, entonces, que dice que todas estas palabras, bajar, pejer o fer, bair, ver, vienen de una palabra proto-indoeuropea, bejer. Entonces, eso así ellos pueden
These words
hablar de la reconstrucción del indoeuropeo. Sí, skip ahead. Must look like one of those old people, grandparents hooking up a webcam right now with my tech savvy here.
Greek, it's per. In modern Greek, this might be pronounced like an F sound, but in ancient Greek, it was actually an aspirated P sound. In Latin, it's fer. In Gothic, it's bair. In Old English, it's ber. They all come from Proto-Indo-European baher. And my pronunciation of these different languages is probably not perfect, but I'm just giving it a shot myself. I should point out that the Proto-Indo-European words are theoretical reconstructions, and that there's no way of knowing for sure what they sounded like. But these words here are fairly recognizable. Some are a little less recognizable. In English, we have the word work, which comes from Old English, wirchan. In modern Greek, the word for work is ergo, which was ergon in ancient Greek. And in some texts, there was an alternate form, wergon. They both stem from the Proto-Indo-European word, wergom. Indo-European languages can be divided into two classes, the Kentum languages and the Sotum languages. Sotum is the word for 100 in Avestan, an ancient Iranian language. Kentum is the word for 100 in Latin. These two words illustrate a sound shift that occurred in Indo-European languages. Proto-Indo-European had a palatalized K sound that was distinct from the regular velar K sound. A palatalized consonant sounds kind of like it's followed by a Y sound, like K as opposed to K. In the Sotum languages, this palatalized sound remained a separate phoneme from K, and it became a sibilant sound, like a S or a Sh. So the Proto-Indo-European word for 100, kyumtom, became shatam in Sanskrit, shimtas in Lithuanian, and in many Slavic languages it's sto. These words have all developed and diverged quite a bit, but if you're aware of the sound shift from a K sound to an S sound, you can recognize these cognates more easily. In the Kentum languages, the two K sounds merged together, or in the case of the Germanic branch, shifted to an H sound. So kyumtom became kentum in Latin, and hekaton in Greek, kant in Welsh, and hund in Old English. So let's take a look at these two words in English, hundred and cent. We usually think of hundred as a native Germanic word and cent as a loan word from Latin, but these are actually cognates. First, let's take away the ending of the word, rid, which comes from a suffix meaning count or number. Then let's change the H back to a K, and now you can kind of see the resemblance. See the resemblance. Remember that the C in cent was originally pronounced like a K, K, in Latin. Also remember that D is the voiced equivalent of T, so you can often see these sounds alternating in related languages.
We have that in Chilean Spanish too, when you have a voiceless occlusive between vowels, sometimes it becomes voiced. So we have something like cuatro pesos could be cuatro besos. So it sounds like a B sound. Or you could say something like el pato, mira el pato, mira el pato, mira el pato. And that's very Chilean, pato, mira el pato. Ay, mira el pato ahí, un pato malo. Pato malo significa como alguien malo, una persona mala, algo así. Like a kind of like a riffraff or something. Ay, mira, puro pato malo. If you listen to pato, that's a T that's becoming voiced. And so it's almost an approximate D. And so those things still happen contemporarily.
Some core words have been preserved in many or even all Indo-European languages. These include some animals, for example, Proto-Indo-European equus. This means horse. You know that equestrian animal? In Latin, it's equus. In ancient Greek, it was hippos. In Sanskrit, it's ashvaha. And in Persian, it's asp. The Latin and Greek examples are kentum examples. but in Greek it seems that the K sound assimilated to the P sound next to it. The Sanskrit and Persian examples are Sotam examples, since you can see that the K sound became sh and s. It also seems that the W sound shifted to a V sound in Sanskrit and to a B sound in Persian. And those are sound changes that take place frequently in various different languages. Other frequent cognates include the numbers from 1 to 10, words referring to family members, agricultural words, and various natural phenomena, like the words for tree and wood. In Proto-Indo-European, doru or dreu. In Old English, treo. In Gothic, triu. In Ancient Greek, doru, which actually meant spear. In Sanskrit, daru. In Old Church Slavonic, drevo. In Armenian, dzar. This shared vocabulary might be hard to spot when you're not looking for it, but when you start to notice the sounds that commonly alternate in those cognates, for example, the voiceless T and the voiced D, then cognates start to be more obvious. Indo-European languages have developed so far from Proto-Indo-European that grammatically they are very diverse, and they have many features that other Indo-European languages don't share. But because Proto-Indo-European was a highly inflected language, all of its descendants are inflected languages to some extent. By inflection, I mean that words change form to reflect grammatical functions like number, person, tense, mood, case. One example is the verb endings we find in various Indo-European languages. In Proto-Indo-European, the reconstructed singular forms for the verb to bear are behero, or beherami, beherasi, beherati. And in Sanskrit, beharami, beharasi, beharati. In Latin, fero, ferus, feret. In Old English, beru, or bero, biris, biris. In many languages, including English, these inflections have been lost to a large extent. In modern English, we only retain the third person inflection, he bears or she bears. But English still had the second person inflection until the early modern English period. So if you read a King James Bible, you'll see this sentence, "Thou bearest record of thyself." This is the second person form, and thou means you. Cases. Proto-Indo-European nouns had inflections for 8 grammatical cases. Sanskrit maintained all 8 cases, and so did the ancient Iranian language Avestan. Latin retained 6 cases, and Old English had 4. Modern English nouns do not have case endings, and that's also true for many other Indo-European languages, like most of the Romance languages. When languages no longer have case inflections, the function of nouns is indicated more by word order and by the use of prepositions. But many modern Indo-European languages do have numerous cases, like most Balto-Slavic languages, which have 6 to 8 cases, German and Icelandic, which have 4 cases, and modern Greek, which also has 4. So the connection...
So what he's talking about in cases right there, is like this. So we have a vestige of it in English, our possessive case, I believe the dative case. So Bob's dog. We're like, what's the apostrophe S there for? Well, the apostrophe means it indicates that something was there that's not there anymore. And so this used to be, you'd have the case would be that this would be indicates possession right there. So this is indicating that Bob possesses that dog. And in some languages you have agreement right there. So you'd have the case at the end of dog as well. Or, in Old English it was hund, for like hound or whatever. So this is what they mean by case. You indicate whether, that it's a possessive noun or it's an object or an indirect or a direct object, and you have an ending for that. We don't do that in English. We have the apostrophe S, so you can maybe consider that a case, indicating that this is possessive. But before that, there was like an E there, and that was the case ending to indicate possession. So that's what he means. English and Spanish and the Romance languages don't really do that, but you do have, like you said, the Slavic and the Baltic languages that do.
Between the modern Indo-European languages may not be obvious, but when we look back historically at how those languages have developed and the different stages of those languages, we can find more connections. The question of the day: if you speak an Indo-European language, did you discover any new connections between your language and others during this video? Let us know in the comments down below. Be sure to follow LangFocus on Facebook, Twitter, and...
Ok, y ahora vamos a ver un video que habla que nos muestra cómo sonaba un poco y nos muestra algunas palabras del proto-indo-europeo.
The Proto-Indo-European language. Numbers. Oinos, duo, treyes, quetuores, penque, suex, septem, octo, neun, dekimt. Vocabulary: mehter, pter, bretter, suessor, dugter, suknu, nepot, daiher, snussos, sukru, dikemon, hner, vihro, gwenne, egg, hme, himeki, moi, himeme, himene, humoyo, himeyo, tu, wei, nisme, nos, you, uswe, usme, was, swe, quid, quod, quis, quos, quei, quoi, que, n, dacru, dingue, dingue, eshar, sanes, genathos, kienu, gineos, hdont, hdunt, host, house, rock, kjerd, kredhe, nas, pods, ped, jeukur, jeuknes, kjeser, kjesres, ekjos, gos, hawi, herkjos, kjon, mos, sos, wilkos, kjans, henati, grano, hegros, herg, melk, melh, melit, melnes, methu, sal, se, semen, jugom, henna, swep, swepnos, swede, head, beg, gien, gijne, gine, heug, heg, guigo, guigote, mer, gleus, wade, void, gienig, gineusk, gineug, negineugtos, men, seco, hueco, prek, pirsk, pirsk, gnegmen, nomen, aster, dieus, deivos, sehwol, saun, meons, tekiom, woder, udens, wedor, udnes, doru, dreu, huento, heo, sneg, pehur, hunes, querm, leuk, twer, domo, domu, queculo, siu, tex, web, werg, wes, tkies, nokuts, nekuts, hausos, hauster, hauso, kem, came, wesser, wesnes, wet, perut, yer. The king and the god, Grex deivosque, Grex hest, son putlos, Grex sochnum ulinato, tosio geutorm prext, sochnus moignatod, Kietortum Gregim Welked, Hiageso deivom veronum, Upu Rex deivom veronum sesolinu deivom Hiageto, Cliptimoi, Ter verone, Deivos veronos divescum taguat, Quid velsi, Sochnum velmi, Tod hestu. Welked leukos deivos veronos, Nurex potni, Sochnum Giegenhe.
So yeah, if you really want to get in touch with your roots, you can learn Proto-Indo-European and everything. Pero eso es, y pueden ver como similitudes. You can see things that exist still, or that are still really kind of close. Y hay otra cosa que obviamente son totalmente distintas porque han pasado por varios cambios fonéticos y también adoptamos otra palabra. Entonces, por ejemplo, hund, hound, used to be the way we say, we still say, I mean, you still hear it, hound, to refer to like, a dog or anything, pero obviamente otra palabra entraron, se crearon o se cambiaron de significado para significar otra cosa. Entonces, por eso no tenemos, obviamente, todo el vocabulario en común, pero obviamente hay muchos elementos compartidos. Yo diría que demasiados elementos compartidos como para decir que para decir que que es una coincidencia. Entonces, y eso es lo que hacen los lingüistas que estudian el proto-indoeuropeo. Entonces, es obviamente una lengua teórica porque no tenemos ningún registro escrito sobre water y sun. No tenemos ningún registro escrito sobre el proto-indoeuropeo, pero hay muchas similitudes, y mayormente similitudes léxicas, pero como él mostró, que hay también similitudes gramaticales, pero obviamente con el paso de los años las lenguas siguen cambiando, la gramática cambia, entonces hay mucha más diversidad, digamos, gramatical que en esas lenguas, y entonces el método preferido y más, digamos, acertado para poder así reconstruir el proto-indoeuropeo es mediante el léxico y los cambios fonéticos. Entonces, proto-indoeuropeo, no sabemos si había una lengua antes del proto-indoeuropeo. Hay una teoría que el proto-indoeuropeo viene de una lengua aún más antigua que se llamaba, no sé cómo se llama en español, pero Eurasia, una lengua Eurasian. Entonces, I'll write that in the European and Asian language. So a larger linguistic family that includes most of the European and Asian language families. But this one is super theoretical right now, and it's very hotly debated, the Eurasian language family. Entonces, ¿alguna pregunta sobre el proto-indoeuropeo? Ninguna pregunta? That's one that you can super impress your +1 with at Thanksgiving. If you know, you can have a whole conversation in Proto-Indo-European with yourself, because there's no native speakers of it, obviously. Pero eso para darle una idea un poco más clara sobre lo que es o lo que era el proto-indoeuropeo. Entonces, ok, vamos entonces, si no hay comentario ni pregunta, vamos a seguir hablando del latín. Entonces, obviamente estamos ya adelantándonos varios siglos o varios miles de años, porque ya sabemos que latín viene de la familia itálica, que viene del proto-indoeuropeo. Entonces ya estamos adelantados por varios miles de años. Entonces, pero hablamos de que antes había gente en lo que hoy en día es España y Portugal, o en la península ibérica teníamos los lusitanos, los celtas, los griegos, fenicios, todos esos pueblos, y hablamos de que la única lengua que se sigue hablando en esa región que no fue absorbida por el latín fue el vasco o el euskera, que todavía se habla en el norte de España, en el País Vasco. Pero la demás lengua, aunque hubo periodos de bilingüismo, digamos, y quizás de contacto lingüístico entre el latín y esas lenguas, con el paso de los años, porque ya sabemos que el Imperio Romano duró muchos años, esas lenguas obviamente murieron a favor del latín. Con las varias generaciones empezaron a preferir el latín. Quizá hubo un poco de diglosia por un tiempo, pero después de eso el latín se volvió la lengua dominante de la península ibérica. Y no dejaron mucha huella, digamos, en lo que es el español moderno, porque fueron absorbidos por el latín. Quizá unos apellidos, unos topónimos, pero no hay mucha influencia. Entonces, muy bien. Entonces, hablando del latín, con la llegada de los romanos a la península ibérica, con el paso de los años otra vez hubo una unificación lingüística. El latín se volvió la lengua, o la versión del latín que se hablaba en la península ibérica se volvió la lengua preferida, y dominó las otras lenguas. Y con la caída del Imperio Romano, so we're kind of just we're not going through all of Roman history, but going straight to the kind of the fall of the Roman Empire. Con la caída de los romanos, los visigodos invadieron la península ibérica y estuvieron hasta por 3 siglos. So it was like, 3 centuries. So you think, oh, okay, maybe there's some influencia de los visigodos, de la lengua que hablaban ellos, pero no, eran muy romanizados y de hecho hablaban el latín vulgar, entonces también hablaban latín. Entonces su lengua no llegó a dominar la península porque ya hablaban latín, entonces. Y su influencia lingüística otra vez es mínima. Solo dejaron algunos nombres, como Rodrigo, Gonzalo, Hermenegildo. Those are all Visigoth names. Pero I don't think Hermenegildo es muy común, es uno de esos nombres que quizá tenga de tu abuelo o algo así, si vive en un país hispanohablante. Pero tampoco dejaron mucha huella en el español o en el latín. ¿Por qué? Porque hablaban la lengua que ya se hablaba ahí. Entonces, no hubo mucho contacto lingüístico. Ya pudieron hablar con todos los hablantes de latín en latín. Entonces, no hubo necesidad de que su lengua fuera aprendida por los habitantes de la península. Pero en el año 711 llega la primera lengua que dejó una huella notable en el español moderno. El reino árabe o los moros llegaron desde la costa norteña de la África y invadieron la península ibérica y estuvieron presentes desde el año 711 hasta el año 1492. Entonces eso es mucho tiempo, casi 800 años. Entonces sí hubo una fuerte influencia, especialmente en el léxico del árabe, en el español medieval que se hablaba en ese entonces. Durante ese periodo de ocupación árabe, se desarrolló otro dialecto que era romance y era mozárabe, era una mezcla del árabe que se hablaba y la versión del latín o el español primitivo que se hablaba en esa región. Hubo un periodo de bilingüismo romance árabe. El romance empieza a ganar más tierra de nuevo en el territorio árabe a través de lo que era, se llamaba la Reconquista. So if you take a Spanish history of this, history of Spain class, la Reconquista era cuando los reyes católicos poco a poco iban reconquistando, como decían, en la península ibérica. Y no era algo de la noche a la mañana, era algo que duró obviamente 800 años casi. Era una reconquista de los reinos católicos, los reinos cristianos, que duró varios siglos. Y el dialecto del norte de España, de la región de Burgos, reemplaza el árabe, el castellano. Entonces, había varios reinos cristianos, Christian kingdoms or Catholic kingdoms, and they all kind of had different Romance dialects. But it was the one that spoke Castilian, which gave way to modern day Spanish, that got the most land. And that's why we now speak Spanish instead of like gallego, leonés, aragonés, catalán, simplemente por una cuestión política. El reino de Castilla ganó más tierra, por lo tanto, los conquistadores que llegaron a las Américas hablaban español o castellano y no predominantemente otra lengua romance que se hablaba en la península ibérica. Entonces podemos ver lo que pasó con la Reconquista. Aquí en el número 1 tenemos 2 reinos y luego tenemos varios reinos. Y en cada uno de esos reinos se hablaba una lengua distinta. Tenemos asturiano, leonés, tenemos gallego, castellano, aragonés, también tenemos aquí catalán. Y eran lenguas romance, a veces mutuamente comprensibles y a veces no, especialmente modernamente, contemporáneamente. Depende de la lengua. El gallego quizá es más parecido al portugués, obviamente más parecido al portugués que el catalán, por ejemplo, que está por acá. Pero como podemos ver, fue la estrategia militar del Reino de Castilla. So they did it in like a forma de una cuña, like a wedge. So it was their military strategy that led to why we speak Spanish instead of gallego, castellano, aragonés, leonés, because they went in a form of a wedge while the other ones just went straight down. The other kingdoms went straight down. And by doing that kind of wedge thing, they got more of a foothold, and eventually castellano became la lengua predominante en la península ibérica. Pero este fue un proceso que duró casi 8 siglos. Entonces, y el árabe dejó su huella fuertemente en el español, en el castellano de ese entonces. ¿Alguna pregunta sobre la Reconquista y su consecuencia lingüística? So it really is just a political, military reason why why are we speaking Spanish instead of, Portuguese or anything? Well, big reason is that's because Spanish, people spoke, the ancestor of Spanish got the most land en la Reconquista, entonces. La influencia del musulmán en el español ha sido considerable. El 8% yo creo que fue la tasa, o sea, unos 4,000 palabras que existentes en el español vienen del árabe. Cosas así como jarabe, zócalo, tarifa, ojalá. El artículo al, por ejemplo, yo creo que hablamos de, did I show you the video of Reebok and Nike? Esos son Reebok, son Nike. Was that this class? Did I show that one? That's kind of what happened here. The Lady Mondegreen phenomena. I hope that's how you spell Mondegreen. So you have words like almohada, palabras así como alfalfa, álgebra, que realmente son dos palabras en árabe. Al era el artículo como definido, the. So it's the, and however they pronounced that back then, the pillow. Ojalá also, yeah, ojalá is another example. Ojalá, basically, Allah, God willing. Allah being God, God willing. Same with hola. Hola has to do with Allah as well. Allah as well. Pero aquí al was the article, and then this was the actual noun right here. But Spanish speakers heard this as one word, reinterpreted it, and so a lot of the words that begin with al in español son de origen árabe. Almohada, alfalfa, álgebra, alfajor, algo así. Todo eso viene del árabe y del dialecto que hablaban los moros que venían de la costa norteña de África. Andalucía, al-andaluz, almacén, alfombra. La terminación y para indicar pluralidad, israelí, o alguien de alguna región, israelí, marroquí, jabalí es like a warthog, entonces jabalí. Entonces, esos son, hay muchas palabras de origen árabe también, como naranja, limón, esa palabra viene del árabe. Entonces, creo que fue el 8%, si no me equivoco, 8%, tengo que averiguarlo. Pero unas 4,000 palabras son de origen árabe que se pueden, bueno, más o menos como 4,000, y se puede decir que vienen del árabe. Entonces, la influencia del árabe ha sido mucho más notable que la influencia de, por ejemplo, de las otras lenguas como de los visigodos, de los celtas, de los fenicios, de todos esos pueblos que estaban antes. Es el árabe que ha tenido más influencia en el español moderno. Entonces, esas palabras todas, y junto con otras palabras, vienen del árabe. And that's the reason ojalá always requires a subjunctive, because it's kind of like saying, espero que, ojalá que venga. So it's kind of like an expression of volition. And that's why I always use the subjunctive after that. But it's ojalá, I forgot what means, but Allah, obviamente, Allah, God. Entonces, ¿alguna pregunta sobre el árabe? ¿Ninguna pregunta sobre el árabe? ¿Ninguna pregunta? La gramática no duró. No hubo mucha influencia gramatical. No tenemos mucha influencia gramatical del árabe en el español. Mayormente fueron fueron influencias léxicas. Y puede haber algunas razones por eso. Primeramente, son dos lenguas tipológicamente muy distintas. So they're from different language families. So their grammar is, there's a huge gap in the similarities of their grammar. And so that could have led to it. También razones sociales. Obviamente en ese entonces había un conflicto religioso y político entre los musulmanes y los cristianos, un conflicto que existe en mucha parte del mundo todavía. Entonces, quizá por razones sociales, entre los reinos cristianos no era muy favorable, digamos, hablar árabe o dejar que el árabe le influyera demasiado en el español. Entonces, no sé, pero puede haber varias razones por las que no hay influencia tan gramatical en el español del árabe, pero a pesar de que hay mucha influencia léxica. También tenemos, and you have other, like the preposition hasta, también viene del árabe también. ¿Ninguna pregunta? ¿Ninguna pregunta? Ok. Entonces, lo que voy a hacer antes de proceder, los voy a dividir en grupos y quiero que ustedes investiguen también. Quiero que ustedes encuentren, digamos, 5 palabras de influencia árabe que existen en el español hoy en día. Palabras que no hayamos usado, entonces. So you can't have anything that we've already used. So 5 palabras y quizá just maybe like a miscellaneous fact of Arabic influence in Spanish. Entonces le voy a dar como 4 minutos para hacer esto, porque es simplemente un ejercicio de Google, pueden googlearlo. Pero 5 palabras más que no hemos tratado todavía, que son de origen árabe. Adelante. Record again. ¿Por qué puro sustantivo o mayormente sustantivo? ¿Por qué es más fácil que un sustantivo se le preste a otra lengua que un verbo, digamos? ¿Qué creen ustedes? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? ¿Por qué? Vamos, vamos, vamos. Professor's going to sit here and just stare at you awkwardly then. Muy bien. Same thing in English when you have English-Spanish contact. Do we have many Spanish verbs borrowed into English? You have a lot of nouns, especially with food and stuff like that, y lugares como cañón, canyon, tornado, tornado, huracán, hurricane, hamaca, hammock, canoa, canoe, aguacate, avocado. Entonces, puro sustantivo. Yo creo que lo que pasa ahí es que para que un verbo sea prestado a una lengua, tiene que haber quizá más similitudes gramaticales o tipológicas. El árabe y el español para conjugar su verbo son 2 sistemas de conjugación totalmente distintos. Entonces requieren más tiempo quizá y más cambios lingüísticos para que un verbo en 2 lenguas así como 2 lenguas tipológicamente como distantes se le preste y se perpetúe y sea algo quizá permanente dentro de la lengua. Tenemos un ejemplo, por ejemplo, ojalá, God willing, pero entró al español como una expresión ya fija, as a kind of set expression. So that's why it came in. Cuando un verbo se presta al español, so when you have like a verb from English being loaned into Spanish, there's some changes that have to occur before. You can't just have it come in like it is. You can't just say, have the word, por ejemplo, ¿cuál es un ejemplo? Un ejemplo de un verbo, un verbo que he escuchado, to mop, en Spanish es chapear, pero a veces se escucha mopear, tengo que mopear el piso. You can't just say mop, translate mop over, and transfer mop over. The grammar has to be adapted to it too. So it has to be mop, so there has to be phonetic changes and adaptations, and then morphological ones, or where they have to put a verb ending on it so you can conjugate it in Spanish. As it is MOP, there are no verbs that end in P in Spanish. So that's why it's easier if you're going to have lexicon or vocabulary enter into a language in situations of language contact, the nouns are a lot easier to go because they just describe everyday objects. You can just easily implement those. Adjectives might be a little harder because that has grammatical aspects too. Spanish, majority of adjectives come after the noun, whereas in English they come before the noun, and so that would require some grammatical adaptations. You have verbs like Facebookear, WhatsAppear, Googlear, tuitear. Obviamente tuvo que haber cambios adicionales. No pudieron prestarse así peladitos, así tal cual al español. So to tweet, you can't just say tweet, put it in Spanish and say, okay, te voy a tweet. I mean, you can, but then you're not conjugating tweet. You're conjugating ir, te voy a hacer tweet, algo así. No, you have to have the phonological or the phonetic adaptation, and then you have to put the verb ending on it. So that's probably one of the big reasons why you don't find a lot of Arabic verbs in Spanish, because of those additional steps that have to occur. So mucho de eso, de las palabras del léxico árabe en el español son sustantivos. Excepciones a esa regla son ojalá, que es una expresión fija, pero sí es algo verbal. La preposición hasta, you have hasta that came from Arabic. It had a weird path into Arabic. It went out of Spanish into Arabic and back into Spanish, some say. But that is like one preposition. You don't have the other prepositions. The rest of those are prepositions from Latin. Entonces, la mayoría de la influencia del árabe es de los sustantivos. Entonces, muy bien. ¿Alguna pregunta sobre, a ver, ¿no hay ninguna pregunta sobre el árabe? Muy bien, ok. Entonces, tenemos otra forma, tenemos lo que se llama palabras patrimoniales y cultismos. Entonces, a veces tenemos palabras distintas que vienen de la misma raíz, pero que entran a la lengua por caminos diferentes. Con el paso de tiempo, frecuentemente, el paso de tiempo puede esconder, ocultar el verdadero origen de una palabra por los cambios fonéticos. Aurícula en latín, oreja, speculum, espejo. El léxico de español o el vocabulario acumulaba palabras por dos maneras diferentes. So we're going to get into things like sound changes and everything, and how you get all these words from Latin into Spanish. El léxico del español, la lista de palabras y su diccionario acumulaba palabras por dos maneras diferentes. Palabras patrimoniales y cultismos. Palabra patrimonial es una palabra que viene por transmisión oral, la mayoría de palabras. So these are the words in their majority that go through all the sound changes. So, for example, aurícula, oreja, oreja sería una palabra patrimonial. Hubo varios cambios fonéticos para dar lugar a oreja. The A and the U, for example, fused together into the O. This I became an E. The U fell out. The CL came together, and the CL, this is a weird phonetic change, but the kl, so it was like orekla, the kl eventually became a ch sound. It went through various stages, but eventually became a ch sound. The same thing happened with espejo. Speculo, that the U fell out, so you had speclu. Spanish, there's a rule where you can't start a syllable with S and consonant. So that's why you have, there's an E there. The E got put in there for that reason. That's why, like you'll hear, when they say, some kids say Spider-Man, Spanish-speaking kids say Spider-Man, comes out as Spider-Man. It's that rule right there. They're putting the E before the S, because in Spanish, you can't have a syllable begin S consonant. So they split it up, E, S, and then the consonant begins the next syllable. So that E went there. So you have especlu, and then cl became ch, espejo, espejo. Entonces, esos son las palabras patrimoniales. Las palabras patrimoniales son la mayoría de las palabras y son las palabras que sufren los cambios fonéticos. Entonces, frecuentemente han evolucionado a lo largo de los siglos. Entonces, han ocurrido muchos cambios en esas palabras para dar lugar a cosas así como espejo, de espéculo, oreja, de aurícula. What's another one? Eyes comes from oculum, ojo, oculum. Entonces, otros cambios. Los cultismos son palabras que muchas veces entran a la lengua más adelante. Esas palabras que proceden de transmisión escrita. So, big difference. Patrimoniales son de transmisión oral. Cultismos proceden de transmisión escrita y muchas veces entran a la lengua después de cierto cambio fonético. So when you're talking about sound changes, those are chronological. So if you have a word, if you have that CL rule where CL becomes ch, but you had a word that came in after that change occurred, then that change wouldn't occur with the word because it wasn't present in the language as that change was occurring. So phonetic changes are things that are chronological. And if you have a word come in after a phonetic change, if you have a segment in a word come in the language after that specific phonetic change occurred, if it comes in after that change occurred, then that change does not occur in the word. So let's just say speculo came in after the ch sound. So maybe espejo, now it would be especulo. especulo, because it came in after, chronologically after that j sound occurred. Entonces, los cultismos representan una minoría de las palabras. Y frecuentemente, o como les estaba diciendo recientemente, no han sufrido evoluciones drásticas. Se parecen más a su raíz del latín clásico. So, you get these words, two words that come from the same Latin word. One is a palabra patrimonial que sufre casi todo lo cambio fonético y se da una palabra, y luego otra palabra, un cultismo que se transmite por vía escrita y muchas veces entra a la lengua después de un cierto cambio fonético. Y aquí tenemos dos palabras que vienen de la misma raíz, but the palabra the cultismo maintains its form closer to what the original Latin was than the palabra patrimonial. Why? Because the palabra patrimonial via oral, and it's gone through a lot of phonetic changes, while the cultismo has not gone through as many or any phonetic changes. So you get something like, they're called dobletes. Palabra patrimonial, derecho. Palabra culta, directo. I think la palabra latina, directum. So this looks more like the Latin word, directum. Derecho, obviamente, sufrió más cambios. Palabra patrimonial, estrecho, estricto. I don't know if that was I think it was strictum or something like that. Delgado, delicado, I believe that's from delicatus. So you see this looks more like the Latin word. Fuego, foco. I forget, was the fogo for the Latin word for fire, focum or something. I will get there later. I took one semester of Latin as a requirement for my PhD, and after the final, I felt like I was holding something in a bucket, keeping it from spilling out. After the final, I just let it all go, because there's so many sound changes. It just all the cases and everything. Rayo, radio, llave, clave, llaga, plaga, llama, flamante. And you have llave and clave come from obviously the same. It's originally had the C there. That's a sound change that occurred. For example, CL in some cases stayed a y sound and didn't go to a h sound. Plaga, PL did the same thing, turned into a y sound. And those are changes we'll talk about in a little bit. Llama, flama, entonces flamante. Entonces podemos ver que hay los dos tipos de palabras, patrimonial y palabra culta, la misma raíz, pero entran a la lengua por caminos distintos y diferentes. ¿Alguna pregunta sobre palabra patrimonial y palabra culta? Do we understand the difference? Why one looks more like the Latin root than the other? The palabra patrimonial goes through a bunch of phonetic changes chronologically, and it's oral transmission. While the palabra culta or cultismo, a lot of times, first of all, it's written, enters the language as through written, transmission, and a lot of times might come back into the language later on down the line after certain changes have occurred. So CT palatalized became ch, so directo, derecho. So this came in after the CT to CH change occurred and stayed CT. Same with here, estrecho. This right here, you had the k sound between vowels was voiced, so deligado, and then the I fell out, and they gave way to delgado. This came back into the language after those two changes had occurred. So same root, but different pathways into the vocabulary of the language. So, la diferencia, porque la palabra tuviera time for this. Okay, entonces tenemos dobletes en inglés, and this is a little different because they don't have the same Germanic root, but one came in through written and one came in through oral. So which side, the left or the right, do you think is the patrimonial and the palabras cultas? Which side do you think is which? A ver. Which one do you think came through oral transmission, and which one do you think came through later on through written transmission?
I was going to say that was oral. Actually, I was going to say it was oral, right?
Okay, so you think oral was right, and then
Yeah.
written was left?
Yeah.
And someone in
I
the
think it's
chat,
the other way around.
and someone in the chat says oral was left and oral, and we think it's the other way around. It was, this is oral Germanic right here. And then this is from Latin. These are, you know, the contact. English has an interesting history. English is like 3 or 4 languages dressed up in a trench coat, pretending to be one language. That's kind of what it is, because of all its contact with other languages. Or, yeah, so it's like, you know, 3 or 4 different languages in a trench coat. And so this Latin had contact with English in various forms. First of all, when England was invaded by the Franks, they spoke a Latin-based language, you know, French, and that's where a lot of French influence comes from in English. And also, you had this period of time where the highfalutin people thought that Greek and Latin were much more prestigiosos que el inglés, and so they would bring in Latin words into English and Greek words into English in like the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. Pero, y estas son las palabras germánicas: daughter, water, tree, star, night, hand, tooth. Entonces, estas palabras son las palabras patrimoniales, y tenemos aquí las palabras cultas. Entonces, filial, aquatic, filial, that's where you get, you know, filial, you get hija, hijo from filial, tree, arboreal, aquatic, stellar. Estos mayormente, en su mayoría, entraron al inglés más adelante, primeramente, y luego, cronológicamente más adelante, y luego también muchas veces por vía escrita. Entonces, muy bien, ¿alguna pregunta? So talking about the Franks, or the Franks, this is why we have like stuff like cow, beef, pig, pork, lamb, mutton. So these both meant the same things during the Frankish invasion. But back in that time, French, or Franc French, was the prestigious language spoken, as opposed to, you know, Old English or Middle English. And so this difference was like a social difference, but this could be a doblete. It was a social difference. So the highfalutin, you know, French speakers and invaders didn't want to be associated with the, you know, English peasants and their language. So what they ate at the table was their word. So no, I'm not eating a cow, I'm eating beef. I'm not eating a pork, I'm not eating a pig, I'm eating pork. I'm not eating lamb, I'm eating mutton, I'm eating those dirty English animals. And so that's why we have this doblete. So now, today, this is the animal, the English word, and then the Latin-based French, you know, French word is the food that you eat, because of that social difference. Like, oh, I'm not eating those dirty English pigs or lambs. I'm eating my French mutton or my French pork or beef or whatever. So, otro ejemplo de un doblete, entonces, de palabras en inglés. But that was more of a social thing. Kind of really petty, pero así ocurrió entonces. But you wouldn't really say, like, you sit down to eat, and then we think about it nowadays, it really is a doblete. You wouldn't say, I'll have myself a cow sandwich. No, you say beef, right? A cow sandwich kind of sounds weird. I'm gonna have a pig sandwich. No, that sounds weird too. Or I'm gonna have a pulled pig sandwich instead of a pulled pork sandwich. Almost sounds a little bit horrific, a pulled pig sandwich. And mutton, I don't usually eat mutton. That's still, lamb is kind of, you know, I don't really like lamb, but you wouldn't say down, we're gonna have, I actually do in English. You say, you know, people for Easter, for example, they eat lamb, for example. So that's less of a doblete than cow and beef and pig and pork. Muy bien. ¿Alguna pregunta? But you get stuff like chicken, and what do you say for, what's another word for bird meat?
Poultry.
Poultry, yeah, poultry. And we don't say I'm going to sit down, and that's another doblete that didn't hold. I think it's more applies to cow and beef, pig and pork. You don't sit down and say, oh, I just love these, you know, fried poultry wings or something like that. Or, oh, I love my poultry with 11 herbs and spices or something like that. No. Entonces, eso es un doblete que no se mantuvo. Pero estos, pork and beef, pork and pig, beef and cow, sí se mantuvieron. Entonces, ¿alguna pregunta sobre los dobletes, la palabra patrimoniales o los cultivos? ¿Ninguna pregunta? Okay, moving on. Entonces, we're done with that. Now we're going to get into the nitty gritty here. Okay. No tenemos mucho tiempo, pero vamos a empezar. Evolución fonológica y fonética del latín al español. Entonces vamos a ver los cambios fonológicos, los cambios fonéticos que ocurrieron para dar lugar al español, al vocabulario y la palabra española que conocemos hoy en día. I recommend, obviously this will be up on Blackboard, but yeah, we're going to go through this a little bit slower porque hay muchos detalles. Entonces, tenemos que hablar de cambios consonánticos y cambios vocálicos, porque hubo ambas cosas, cambios consonánticos y cambios fonológicos. Entonces, la evolución fonológica del latín al español empezó como latín arcaico, luego tuvimos una diglosia. Y diglosia can be dialectal or language. It's where one dialect or one language, there are either two dialects or two languages. One dialect or one language is used for one thing, and the other is used in another setting. So you have it in the United States. Con el español en Estados Unidos tenemos en comunidades de habla española o comunidades donde hay contacto lingüístico entre el español y el inglés, tenemos una situación diglósica o una situación de una diglosia. El español mayormente se usa en contextos familiares, entre amigos, contextos domésticos, y el inglés para los bilingües, especialmente la segunda y la tercera generación, se usa fuera de la casa, en el trabajo, en el colegio y cosas así. Y eso es lo que pasó. Hubo dos dialectos y el dialecto que se usaba más de latín era el latín vulgar. Y vulgar no significa que usaban palabrotas todo el día, no. Vulgar simplemente significa de la gente. That's just what people spoke. Clásico era más escrito. Clásico era más escrito y vulgar era lo que se hablaba. Luego se siguió evolucionando, se dio lugar al latín tardío, luego castellano medieval y luego castellano moderno. So these are, we're skipping over hundreds and maybe thousands of years right here. But castellano moderno, that's a problematic term too, because there's so much variation with el español moderno. Pero castellano medieval, que se trajo a las Américas con la llegada de los españoles y luego se esparció por las Américas y tenemos varios dialectos y mucha variedad del español moderno aquí en las Américas ahora. Entonces, vamos a estudiar dos procesos o cambios que distingan el español de otras lenguas romances. So, all of the Romance languages went through evolution, but there's certain changes that distinguish Spanish from the other languages. And I think what we're going to do right here is just briefly introduce them, and then we'll start to go over them on Tuesday, because I don't want to just skip over it. Tenemos la pérdida de la aspiración, entonces la F latina se volvió como un sonido como J, y luego desapareció en muchos contextos en el español. Todavía existe la F en español, pero en ciertos contextos fonéticos la F se perdió, se enmudeció, y en otros contextos se conservó. Pero en otras lenguas románicas, otras lenguas romances, en esos contextos la F se mantuvo. We talked about falar en portugués y hablar en español. So that's one of those differences. Falar, we also have another one. Hacer en español, fazer en portugués, fazer. So the F in a lot of those same contexts was maintained in Portuguese. Y luego la reestructuración del sistema de sibilantes. So Latin and then early medieval Spanish had a lot of sibilants. Sibilant just means S-like sounds. And we're going to go over how those fuse together and how we have this giving way to this distinction between Spain, where you have theta, and not the United States, the Americas, where you have just the S sound basically, and all the different changes that had to occur to give way to that. Pero vamos a parar ahí, vamos a detenernos ahí, y vamos a seguir hablando de esto el martes. ¿Pero hay alguna pregunta? So these aren't all the changes. Right now we're going to the first two changes that distinguish Spanish from other Romance languages in their changes. This weekend, I'll be continue to work on your test, as well as continue to get back to you on your project proposals that I'm going over. If there are any questions on either of those, let me know. Cualquier pregunta en general también. Vamos a ver lo que tenemos de tarea primero. y luego podemos terminar la clase. So, yeah, you have no homework over the weekend, nothing to read. So take a break. I know you just had a test. And nos vemos el martes. Que tengan un buen fin de semana, aunque hoy es jueves, como siempre digo. Que les vaya súper. Gracias por venir. Cualquier cosa, cualquier necesidad, por favor, no duden en avisarme. Aquí estoy para ayudarlos. Muchas gracias. Que tengan un buen fin de semana. Chao, chao.
I have a question
Yeah, sure.
for you.
Mhm.
Are you teaching any senior level courses next semester, or do you know?
I will be teaching next semester CMLL 3308, which is the core class for this, the translation certificate. But I won't be teaching senior level classes until next fall, which hopefully I'll be back in person by next fall. I'm crossing my fingers I'll be back in person next fall. But it'll be 4309 will be the senior level class I'll be teaching next fall, which is Introduction to Translation and Interpretation.
Okay, dang, I graduate in May, but
Oh,
I still
okay.
need to take one more Spanish class. So
Okay,
I
one more,
was gonna see
yeah.
if you were teaching.
No, so to figure out which ones to avoid, right?
No, I
No.
like
No,
how you teach. So
I'm just joking. I'm just joking. No, but unfortunately, next semester I won't. It'll just be 3308, and usually, in the fall, in the spring, it's 3308, and I teach a graduate level class. So usually my senior level classes are in the fall. So, but hey, you can delay your graduation for a semester. Smart decision, right? No,
I
don't do
think
that.
I should do that.
Because it'll take a couple more $1,000 from you to do that. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Muy bien.
Okay,
Mhm.
thank you.
De nada. Nos vemos.
I was gonna ask if you could upload the reading this weekend because I have a lot of midterms next week.
Oh, the reading for next week?
I wanted to get ahead, yeah. the
Okay, yeah,
Blackboard.
yeah, I can upload that. Yeah, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
I know you said to relax, but.
Yeah, come on, overachiever. No, I'll put it up. So.
Okay, thank you,
De
bye.
nada. Bye. Hi, Yel, how can I help you?